I'm Peter Underwood. This is news from the water. Civil disobedience as trust loses voters' confidence. External consultants Hopkins Van Mil were quite clear that they'd not backed CRT's plans for safety zones on the River Lea, but instead sent them back to the drawing board to produce proper risk assessments, real accident figures, and to share all that information with all the groups using the river. And for their part, Canal and River Trust claimed to accept those findings, but it was a grudging acceptance with heavy emphasis on the Trust's duty to enforce what it claimed were existing rules. And the Trust managed to come across as even more heavy-handed by announcing it was taking on external contractors to enforce those rules, contractors who were already the subject of a complaint from the NBTA to the Environment Agency claiming dishonesty. Now, the Trust has now announced signs announcing safety zones in direct contravention of their commitment to put such zones on hold. And uniformed representatives of the controversial car park enforcement company District Enforcement are now making daily checks on the River Lea. And they've told boaters they were there to monitor adherence to the new no mooring signs and watch how customers interact with the new signage. As we predicted 2 weeks ago when the signs first went up, the reaction of London boaters and the National Bargee Travellers Association has been swift. It's already organising a civil disobedience campaign with hundreds of boaters signing up to ignore the new signage, with pre-printed letters complete with legal references to hand to any enforcers who challenge them. The NBTA says that instead of engaging with the users of the waterways as promised, CRT is introducing unnecessary safety zones with the removal of 295 mooring spots. And there are protests planned this weekend for Hackney and Broxbourne. The Broxbourne event will be opposite the rowing club and the Hackney event will be at Daubeny Fields. Now, the NBTA says CRT claimed it was willing to discuss safety in a constructive way through the newly formed Lea Navigation Forum, but instead they're continuing to do what they said they were going to do in the first place. The association promises it will provide all boaters who join the campaign of civil disobedience with full backing in challenging CRT and taking the issue to court if required. False record keeping. Now, if Canal and River Trust can't be trusted in the big issues like the River Lea safety zones, can it be trusted with the small issues? I've known many boaters over many years who've had long and complicated disputes with CRT, often about alleged overstaying, and I've always preferred to believe incompetence by minor officials was the root of the cause. However, for the past many months I've been keeping an eye on the case of Graham King, a relatively new liveaboard boater currently on the Gloucester and Sharp Ness. Graham had travelled over several canals, but it seems CRT's checkers failed to note his passing, and the Trust then made allegations of Graham overstaying and not doing a 20-mile range on the Gloucester and Sharp Ness. Graham challenged that, and eventually, after considerable aggression, CRT backed down and withdrew the notice. Graham says it took him 4 months for what he describes now as a fraudulent overstaying notice to be removed. And it was only when he asked for the record of his sightings that it became obvious that he'd been telling the truth about his movements. Now, as a result of all that, he asked the Waterways Ombudsman to investigate his complaint, but he now claims she failed to take any evidence from him and, in his words, produced the most one-sided report I've ever seen in my life. In fact, he alleges she even created a new false allegation in the interim report, which is now seen. Now, the Waterways Ombudsman is supposedly still investigating his complaint, but Graham remains at a loss to know how he can make 3 56-mile journeys and then be accused of not moving enough. Terrified on the Towpath. Whilst Canal and River Trust spend money on asking the public which canal views they regard as scenic, an exercise some see as slightly sinister, asking whether the non-scenic signs will be seen as ripe for development, the reality of urban towpaths has been highlighted by a major article in the Birmingham Mail. Both online and in print, the newspaper sets out what it calls a timeline of terror on Birmingham's canal paths. It says Birmingham has been rocked by a string of frightening incidents, from a doctor being pushed in the canal to a schoolboy cyclist robbed of his bicycle. And despite all the efforts by CRT and local council to promote towpath cycle routes in urban areas, one cyclist fears there's no safe way to ride around Birmingham's towpaths after thugs attacked him in a botched robbery. And just an hour after the police had arrived and left, on that same stretch of canal, another older cyclist was beaten by a robber who threatened to stab him and rode off with his mountain bike. That first victim said, "There doesn't seem to be a way of getting around the city on a bike without being in danger." Now, there were 3 incidents on October the 12th, but they follow a number of frightening ordeals where pedestrians and cyclists were targeted on canal towpaths across the city. A spanner-wielding thug confronted a cyclist, and a schoolboy was kicked off his bike and punched in the head in a robbery. Several victims have also been pushed into the canal, including 5 women and a 68-year-old doctor who was fishing. And then back in March, a masked gang was terrorising cyclists and stealing their bikes along the Birmingham and Fazeley towpath. And Sophie Watson, 26, said she was attacked by a teenage gang as she rode home to the jewellery quarter along the Worcester and Birmingham canal, and she was one of 5 women assaulted on the canal on the same evening. Dr. Neil Thomas, who's 68, was fishing at Selly Oak when he was attacked and pushed into the canal. And Dr. Thomas, a physics lecturer, told the newspaper, "I'm nearing 70 and I have a white beard. I look old. And if they can target me, then they can target an even older person. Fortunately, I was able to get out, but I struggled and I could have drowned." Victims are now calling for more police presence on the canal, and the police say they've increased high visibility patrols and are working with CRT. We asked CRT what it was doing and whether it had considered encouraging boaters to patrol towpaths, which has had some success in London. CRT says, "By logging any incidents, we can work with the local police and our partners on action plans on how we can work together to tackle this sort of behaviour on our canal towpaths. This could include measures such as the introduction of canal watch schemes or an increased presence of police and PCSOs on the towpath." No professional lockies for the Llangollen hotspot. Now, boaters have got wind of plans by Canal and River Trust to remove the paid professional seasonal lock keepers on the staircase locks at Grindley Brook, and that volunteer lock keepers there are reluctant to take over without the professionals being in charge. A general email to see our boss Richard Parry about the loss of paid seasonal workers from boater Kay Sumpner provoked a response from his number 2 Julie Sharman, which immediately assumed Kay was concerned about Grindley Brook, where long queues and inexperienced hire boaters using a 3-lock staircase create particular risks. Julie Sharman failed to settle any doubts about the loss of the professionals, saying, "Colleagues operating services at Grindley Brook, whether paid or not, will be suitably trained and appropriately supervised to support customers and, most importantly, ensure the overall safety of the locks." Yeah, the answer from the regional CRT head office wasn't any clearer. They said a decision hadn't been made, but went on to say that whether employees or volunteers were used, it was important they were suitably trained. Perhaps conscious of the likely furore if paid jobs were supplanted by volunteers, CRT went on to talk about financial pressure and the need to review the numbers of seasonal workers, but they left themselves a get-out clause, saying whilst we have some staircase locks that are operated entirely by a volunteer team, we recognise that that may not be practicable in all locations, so watch this space. Once more into the breach. Now, just days after the Leeds-Liverpool Canal breach near Rishton between Blackburn and Burnley, emptying millions of gallons of water into the nearby river and leaving boats stranded and tilted at dangerous angles, Canal and River Trust's Chief Operating Officer Julie Sharman was claiming that the Trust had a robust professional inspection regime to identify and prioritise defects and maintenance. Curiously, the stoppage notices about that particular breach have so far failed to identify a cause, despite film from the scene that makes it pretty obvious that a collapsed culvert was the reason for the breach and led to the closure of all those locks between Wigan and Barrowford. Now, the inspection of culverts is meant to be part of a robust inspection regime, the one that Julie Sharman is so proud of, so perhaps we're entitled to ask what went wrong with the regime. The breach was spotted about 10 days ago, first of all as a leak, but within hours the canal bank had breached, and by the following day fabric dams were in place and the water levels began to recover either side of the breach. But CRT needed to hire in massive pumps to move water from one side of the breach to the other, as the water levels on that stretch of the Leeds and Liverpool have been problematic all season. At that stage, the Trust claimed it was still investigating the cause of the breach, and after a week it did manage to stabilise levels on the Burnley side and reopen the Barrowford locks. All the flights on the Blackburn side through to the Wigan flight remain closed, and another update is promised this Friday. Currently, we still have no confirmation the breach was caused by a collapsed culvert, no plan to repair it, and no idea how long a major canal will remain cut in half. At the same time, of course, the Rochdale Canal has been closed for another week as Canal and River Trust makes a further attempt to restore water levels by repairing leaking locks on the summit level. That canal has been closed more than open this summer season. That's all from me this week. Thanks for watching.
We need video and photos of all aspects of the waterways. Email files to peterunderwood2@gmail.com with your name and a brief description of it and where and when it was shot.